My name is Madison Ellis, and I'm 29 years old. About 6 weeks ago, my parents walked into a lawyer's office absolutely convinced they were about to become wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. My mom had even bought a new designer purse for the occasion. My dad had a real estate agent's contact info already in his pocket, already planning to sell a house he hadn't seen the inside of in years. They had no idea what Grandma Rose had written in that sealed envelope sitting on the lawyer's mahogany desk. Nobody in that conference room knew what was coming. When the attorney started reading, my mother let out this sound I'd never heard from her before, something between a gasp and a scream. My dad actually jumped up from his chair so fast it went flying backward. He lunged across the table and tried to grab the papers right out of the lawyer's hands. That's when Mr. Harrison, the attorney, just calmly looked directly at me and said something that made everyone freeze. "Your grandmother asked me to read the next section only if they reacted this way." The entire room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that expensive carpet. My grandmother didn't set up some cruel trap. She was just telling the truth one final time to people who desperately needed to hear it, whether they wanted to or not. But before I take you back into that lawyer's office, I gotta tell you, if this kind of family drama speaks to you, stick around. I've got a lot more to share about what actually happened that day and what came after. Trust me, you're gonna want to know how this all plays out. Red heart if you're already hooked. Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest. Backhand index pointing down and tell us in the comments, have you ever felt like the invisible one in your family? Let me take you back to the beginning. To a town called Riverside, about 2 hours west of Denver, nestled in the foothills where the mountains start to get real. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody else's business before it even happens. Population around 5,000, one stoplight, and for decades the biggest employer was Rose's Building Supply, my grandmother's company. She'd started it from literally nothing, just a single delivery truck and a promise to do good work. By the time she retired, you could walk through almost any construction site in the entire region and find materials with her company's name stamped on them. My grandmother was 83 when she passed away. People said it was peaceful, but honestly, I'm not sure anything about those last few years felt peaceful for her. I drove down to Riverside the day she died, and I remember my hand shaking on the steering wheel the whole way. I've been trying so hard not to lose it in public, you know? Just focusing on the road, the mile markers, anything to keep my mind from going to that dark place where she was just gone. When I got to the funeral home, I expected to be the first one there. I usually was. But I wasn't. My mom and dad were already there, had shown up the night before, which was weird because they lived in Boulder, only about 40 minutes from me. We hadn't actually seen each other in more than 4 months. We weren't in some big fight or anything, we just sort of existed in the same general area without actually connecting. I found my mom in the entrance area having this whole moment with some woman I'd never met. She was doing the whole grieving daughter-in-law routine, tissues in one hand, checking her reflection in a compact mirror with the other, making sure her tears were falling in just the right way for maximum emotional impact. It was like watching someone perform in a play instead of actually experiencing real grief. My dad was across the room in some serious-looking conversation with a man in an expensive suit. He had that thing he does when he's trying to impress people, chest puffed out, chin up, one hand in his pocket like he was posing for some corporate headshot. I found out later that he never even called me to tell me Grandma had died. I heard it from my great-aunt Helen. I just stood there in the doorway for the longest time before either of them noticed me. When my mom finally saw me, she gave me this tight smile, the kind she used when other people were watching, and said, "Oh, Madison, there you are," like I'd just shown up late to a dinner party instead of having just driven through the mountains with my heart absolutely breaking. The funeral service itself was packed. Grandma Rose had touched a lot of lives in Riverside. People who'd worked for her, their families, neighbors, people whose kids she'd helped put through college. They all came. My mom basically ran the whole thing. She organized the seating, the program, who spoke and when. When I asked if I could read something, this beautiful poem by Mary Oliver that Grandma absolutely loved, my mom put her hand on my arm real gentle-like and said, "Honey, your father should be the one to speak." He's the son. It needs to come from him. So my dad got up there in this suit that still had the crease marks from being in the package, and he gave this speech that sounded like he just pulled it off some template website. He talked about Grandma being a pillar of the community and went on about family values and hard work. He even mentioned some book he claimed she loved but got the author completely wrong. It was embarrassing. Grandma would have hated that. The whole thing lasted maybe 4 minutes. 4 minutes to sum up 83 years of someone's life. 4 minutes from someone who hadn't bothered to actually talk to her in over 2 years. I sat there in the third row with my hands folded so tight my knuckles turned white. In my jacket pocket was a folded piece of paper, that Mary Oliver poem I'd wanted to read. I never got to pull it out. Stayed in my pocket for weeks afterward, getting more crumpled every day until I could barely read the words. My great-aunt Helen sat next to me and squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there quiet-like. Then, barely above a whisper, she leaned over and said, "Your grandmother knew, sweetie." She always knew. I turned to look at her, confused. Knew what? She just patted my hand and turned back to face the front. But I could feel something shifting in that moment, like there was information I didn't have yet but would soon understand. The day after the funeral, when I went to Grandma's house, this beautiful old Victorian on Elm Street with a wraparound porch and a garden that she'd been maintaining for 40 years, I found my parents in her study. The desk drawers were wide open, papers scattered everywhere, folders piled on top of folders. My dad was literally on his knees in front of the filing cabinet, going through papers so fast he was tearing them. My mom was standing behind him giving directions like she was commanding a military operation. "Check the back of that drawer," she was saying. She always kept the important stuff in the back. "What exactly are you guys looking for?" I asked from the doorway. My dad didn't even look up. "Insurance papers. Just trying to get everything organized." But I've known this man my whole life, and I could tell he was lying. He only moved with that kind of urgency when money was involved. They weren't looking for insurance papers. They were looking for the will. "Dad, the lawyer has all that stuff already," I said. He stood up, holding a folder, with this look on his face like he was about to explain something to a child who just wasn't getting it. "This is my mother's house. I don't need anyone's permission to look through her things." My mom turned to me with this look of pure dismissal, the kind of look you'd give a kid who wandered into a room they shouldn't be in. And I stepped back. It was this automatic response from years and years of her doing exactly this to me. Whenever I'd push back even a little bit, whenever I disagreed with her about anything, she'd just go silent. Days and days of silence. No texts, no calls, nothing. When I was 14, that kind of silence felt like the end of the world. 29, it still made my stomach drop and my heart race. I left. About 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car in a Walgreens parking lot, just sitting there with the engine running, trying to figure out what to do. My phone rang. The caller ID said Harrison Legal. Madison. A voice I remembered from old family dinners. "This is Mr. Harrison, your grandmother's attorney. I need you to come to my office this Friday. Your grandmother was very specific about this. She wanted you there." My chest got tight. What's going on? I can't discuss details over the phone, but it's important. And Madison, don't tell your parents about this call. Your grandmother was very particular about that. Mr. Harrison had been handling Grandma's legal affairs for almost 30 years. When he told me that Grandma had completely rewritten her will just 4 years ago, and that it was nothing like what my parents were expecting, I believed every word. Apparently, she'd done it right after my dad had moved her into an assisted living facility called Sunset Gardens. Just saying that name made my chest tight. It was the cheapest place in the area, linoleum floors, shared rooms, the kind of overwhelming smell of bleach and disinfectant that never quite covered up what was really underneath. Common room had a TV that was always playing some game show that nobody was actually watching. My grandmother, a woman who'd built a multi-million-dollar business, who'd entertained important people at her dining table, who'd paid for 3 employees' kids to go to college because she believed in lifting people up, spent her final years in a place that charged barely enough to keep operating, picked out by my dad without him even bothering to visit a single other facility. She changed everything in late 2020, Mr. Harrison told me. Right after your father made the move happen without consulting her about it. That night, I called my great-aunt Helen. She picked up on the first ring like she'd been waiting for my call. "Did Mr. Harrison reach you?" was the first thing she asked. "Yeah." "Helen, what's going on?" She took a breath. "Your grandmother made a choice, Madison. She watched your father walk away and she watched you show up. Every single time. And she noticed. I don't understand." "You will. But you need to listen to what the lawyer has to say." Then she told me something I'd never known. In early 2020, Grandma Rose had gotten really sick with pneumonia. She'd been in the hospital for 3 weeks. My great-aunt Helen had called my dad every single day, asking him to come visit. Every day he'd say, "I'll come this weekend." But this weekend never came. For 3 weeks straight, Helen would call and he'd promise and then he wouldn't show up. Meanwhile, I dropped everything. Called my boss at the library where I work, explained the situation, used every vacation day and sick day I had, and drove down to Riverside. I slept in a hospital chair next to her bed for 11 nights straight. Nobody asked me to do it. I just couldn't imagine leaving her alone like that. It wasn't some grand gesture, it was just what you do when someone you love is suffering and needs you. "You didn't do that for money, Madison," Helen said quietly. "And your grandmother knew that. That's exactly why she did what she's about to do." We talked for a while longer, and before we hung up, Helen said something kind of funny. "Wear something with pockets to that meeting. Trust me, you're gonna want somewhere to put your hands." I remember laughing nervously, but I was terrified. I didn't know what was coming. I just knew it was going to change everything. Drop your city and the local time in the comments. We'd love to know where in the world. This story is reaching. We see you. Backhand index pointing down. Friday morning came. I drove to Mr. Harrison's office, which was above an old bookstore downtown. Conference room was exactly what you'd expect. Long oak table, expensive leather chairs, one of those fancy water pitchers that nobody ever drinks from. My parents were already there when I arrived, sitting right up front like they'd staked out prime real estate. My dad was wearing some blazer I'd never seen before, probably bought specifically for this. My mom had that new designer purse positioned on the table in front of her, the way you position something when you want people to notice it and comment on it. I sat down at the far end of the table near the window. Helen sat next to me. The room smelled like expensive leather and old paper. People who rounded out the room were interesting. There was Pastor David from Grandma's church. He'd known her for nearly 40 years and had baptized me as a baby. There were 2 of my dad's cousins, Michael and Susan, who looked deeply uncomfortable being there. And there was a young paralegal sitting in the corner with a notepad, clicking her pen nervously. My dad leaned over to whisper to my mom, except he wasn't actually whispering because I could hear him clear as day. "Once this is done, we call that real estate agent Monday morning." My mom nodded and patted his arm. Then she glanced at me with this look that made me feel about 2 inches tall, like I was furniture that happened to be sitting in the room. Mr. Harrison came in carrying this thick leather portfolio. He sat at the head of the table, adjusted his glasses, and opened the thing without even greeting anybody or making small talk. He just looked at the papers for a moment, then looked up at all of us. "Let's begin," he said. He read through all the legal preliminary stuff first, the standard language about my grandmother being of sound mind, the date she'd signed it, all the witnesses and notary information. April 2020, it said. Witnessed by 2 doctors. Notarized and official. My dad's leg was bouncing under the table. I could feel the vibrations through the floor. "The estate comprises the following," Mr. Harrison continued, turning pages carefully. "The residential property at 2847 Elm Street, Riverside. all savings accounts and investment portfolios held at First National Bank. Personal belongings, furniture, vehicles, and family heirlooms. My dad leaned forward with his hands flat on the table, like he was bracing himself for something. Mr. Harrison turned another page and started reading slowly, deliberately, the way you read when you want every single word to hit home. Regarding the property at 2847 Elm Street, I leave this property in its entirety to my granddaughter, Madison and Ellis. 2 seconds of silence. My dad blinked. Then blinked again. He looked at my mom. She looked at the lawyer. I could literally see the moment they both realized this wasn't going the way they'd planned. "I'm sorry," my dad said. "Can you say that again?" Mr. Harrison didn't repeat himself. He just turned the page and kept reading. "Regarding my savings accounts, investment portfolios, and all remaining financial assets, I leave them in their entirety to my granddaughter, Madison and Ellis." My mom's hand went to her chest like she couldn't breathe. "There's a mistake," she said. "There is no mistake, Mrs. Patterson," Mr. Harrison said calmly. "That can't be right," my dad said, and his voice actually cracked high like a teenager's. He stood up so fast his chair scraped backward and hit the wall with this loud bang. "That's my mother's money. That's my inheritance." Mr. Harrison looked at him over his glasses, real steady and calm. "It was your mother's money," he said. "She made the choice about where it goes." My dad actually reached across the table and tried to grab the papers right out of Mr. Harrison's hands. The lawyer didn't even flinch. "Those are copies," he said. "The originals are filed with the county probate office." My dad stood there holding those papers, staring at them like he couldn't actually read the words on them. Then he just kind of threw them on the table. They scattered like dead leaves. My mom stood up real controlled-like. Her chair didn't hit the wall because she wasn't angry, or at least not the kind of angry that loses control. This was cold fury. This was ice. "She wasn't in her right mind," she said, pointing at Mr. Harrison. "You know she was in her 80s when she signed this." "She was 79, Mr. Harrison corrected. And the will was witnessed by 2 licensed physicians who both certified she was mentally competent at the time of signing." "Doctors can make mistakes," my mom said. "These doctors did not make a mistake." My dad turned to me, and his face was the color of a raw steak. "Did you do this? Did you go behind our backs and talk your grandmother into this?" "I didn't know," I said, and my voice came out so small I barely recognized it. "I didn't know anything about this." He slammed his hand on the table so hard the water pitcher jumped and nearly tipped over. "You were down there every week. Every goddamn week, Madison." Whispering in her ear. Telling her God knows what. That's when Helen's voice cut through the room like a knife. Just his name. "Richard." My dad looked at her. She looked right back at him. She was 76 years old, probably 5'2", and she didn't blink once. "Sit down." And the crazy thing? He sat down. I'd never seen my dad listen to anyone like that before. My mom tried a different approach. She smoothed down her blouse and turned to Mr. Harrison with this warm, reasonable voice she uses at church events and charity galas. "Harold, we appreciate your diligence here, but surely her mother-in-law left something for her own son. Keepsake. Anything." Mr. Harrison reached into that portfolio and pulled out a sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front made my breath catch. It was my grandmother's handwriting. Slightly shaky but still elegant. Still unmistakably hers. The address on the front said, "To be read aloud at my will reading." "There is one more item," Mr. Harrison said. "Your mother-in-law left a personal letter. She specifically instructed me to read it aloud, but only if her son and daughter-in-law reacted with hostility to the terms of the will." My mom started to protest, but Mr. Harrison held up his hand. "She anticipated this," he said. "Please sit down. We're not finished." That envelope just sat there on the table between us. Looking at my grandmother's handwriting there in that room 3 weeks after her funeral, it was like she was suddenly present, like she'd orchestrated this exact moment down to where everyone would sit. Before I read Rose's letter, Mr. Harrison said, she asked me to provide some context, a timeline of events. He pulled out another document, a single typed page. Rose compiled this herself, he said. I only formatted it for readability. He laid it on the table. Even from where I was sitting, I could read the header, Timeline of Relevant Events, 2018 to 2023. My dad went pale. Mr. Harrison read it line by line, his voice completely flat. No emotion, no judgment. Just facts like a court reporter reading a transcript. March 2018. Richard Patterson arranges placement of Rose Patterson at Sunset Gardens Assisted Living without consulting her. My dad opened his mouth to say something, but Mr. Harrison kept going. September 2019. Richard Patterson attempts to list the family home at 2847 Elm Street for sale without informing Rose Patterson. Rose, upon learning of this from a former neighbor, contacts Mr. Harrison and immediately moves to have the property placed in a protected trust in her name, preventing the sale. Richard Patterson does not dispute this. My mom's eyes went down to the table. She couldn't look at anyone. 2019 through 2022. No phone calls, no visits, and no written communication from Richard or Patricia Patterson to Rose Patterson. That's not, my dad started to say, but Mr. Harrison just kept reading. January 2020. Rose Patterson is hospitalized with severe pneumonia for 22 days. Madison Ellis arrives within 6 hours of the hospital call and remains there for the entire stay, sleeping in a chair beside her grandmother's bed. Helen Patterson calls Richard Patterson 4 separate times requesting he visit. He tells her he'll come this weekend each time. He does not visit. Helen's hand found mine under the table. She held it tight. June 2021. Patricia Patterson blocks Madison Ellis's phone number on Richard Patterson's mobile device. She informs Rose Patterson that Madison is too busy with work to call. A nurse at Sunset Gardens reports that Madison had called the facility's front desk in distress, asking why her father would not answer her calls. I couldn't breathe. I remembered that week. That terrible week when I thought my dad had finally cut me off completely. I'd been so confused and heartbroken. I'd called the facility in tears, and the nurse there, I think her name was Linda, had patched me through to Grandma directly. I'd never understood why my calls to my dad had just stopped going through. Now I understood. I looked at my mom. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Helen spoke for the first time since telling my dad to sit down. Her voice was quiet but absolutely steady. I called you 12 times in 2020, Richard. You picked up once. You hung up after 30 seconds. Pushpins share this story if you know someone who always shows up and never gets credit. This one is for them. Red heart. Backhand index pointing down, drop a comment. Do you have a Grandma Rose in your life? Someone who saw you when others didn't? Tell us about them below. Mr. Harrison set the timeline aside and picked up the envelope again. He opened it carefully and pulled out 2 handwritten pages on cream-colored stationery, the kind my grandmother used for letters that mattered. He put on his reading glasses. I'll read this exactly as Rose wrote it, he said. He cleared his throat. Richard. That's how it started. Not dear Richard. Not my son. Just his name. If Harold is reading this aloud, it means you came for the money and you're angry that it's not yours. I'm not surprised. I wish I were. My dad's hands went to his lap. His fingers were laced together so tight his knuckles had turned white. I want you to know that I rewrote this letter 3 times. Each time I tried to be kinder, but kindness is what brought us here. 30 years of kindness. 30 years of making excuses for you. 30 years of telling myself you'd come around. Pastor David was looking down at his hands. You are my son. I loved you from the moment you were placed in my arms. And I have never stopped. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being my son and started being someone who was just waiting for me to die. The sound that came from my dad, I don't even know how to describe it. Like something inside him was cracking, something breaking that couldn't be repaired. Mr. Harrison kept reading. I didn't lose a son to death, Richard. I lost you to entitlement. And that is a grief I wouldn't wish on anyone. He turned the page. Let me tell you what I remember. I remember the day you took me to Sunset Gardens. You drove me there in my own car. You carried one suitcase. You didn't walk me inside. You handed that suitcase to the woman at the front desk and said you had somewhere to be. I stood in that lobby for 10 minutes before anyone showed me to my room. The floor smelled like bleach and chemicals. The mattress had a stain on it. That was March 15th, 2018. I remember the date because it was my birthday. Susan put her hand over her mouth. I remember when you tried to sell the house. Our house. The one where I raised you. Where we had Thanksgiving every year for 50 years. Where I planted those roses in the front garden that I loved so much. When Harold told me what was happening, I moved fast. I protected that house, Richard. But I could not protect myself from knowing you had tried. My dad was staring at a point on the far wall. Not blinking. Not moving. And I remember Patricia. She visited me once. One time in 4 years. She brought cheap chocolates and spent half the time taking pictures of herself to post on Facebook. She stayed for 20 minutes. 14 of those minutes she was on her phone. I counted, Richard. When you're stuck in a bed, counting is about the only thing you can do. I watched Pastor David's face change. He was recalculating everything. Every potluck Patricia had organized at church. Every prayer circle she'd led. Every time she'd stood in the church lobby with her hand on someone's arm, saying she'd pray for them. He was putting it all together now, seeing the gap between the person she pretended to be in public and who she actually was. Patricia's hand was trembling against the table. She never came back. Not once. Mr. Harrison paused and took a breath. And Patricia, I know about the phone. I know you blocked Madison's number on Richard's phone. My nurse told me when Madison called the facility's front desk in tears, asking why her own father wouldn't answer her calls. You let my granddaughter think her father had abandoned her. You let me think she'd stopped caring. That was cruel, Patricia. That was a deliberate choice you made, and I need you to know that I saw it clearly. Tricia stood up so fast her chair actually tipped backward. This is slander. She was confused. She was sick. This is a personal letter, Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Harrison said, his voice exactly the same. It's not a legal accusation. It's her truth. Tricia looked around the room. At Michael, who wouldn't meet her gaze. Susan, whose jaw was set like concrete. At Helen, who was looking right at her with an expression like tempered steel. For the first time in her life, Patricia ran out of audience. Nobody was going to support her narrative. Nobody was going to play the supporting role in her drama. Every single person in that room had heard the same words and was doing the math, comparing the Patricia she showed them publicly with the Patricia who'd blocked her stepdaughter's phone number. The gap was enormous. She sat back down slowly, like the chair might break. Mr. Harrison turned to the next page. There is one final section, he said. Rose wrote this part specifically for you, Madison. He looked at me. For the first time all morning, his expression softened just a little bit at the corners of his eyes. May I continue? He asked. I nodded. I couldn't trust my voice. Madison, he began, and his voice changed when he said my name. It was warmer. The way my grandmother would have said it. You never missed a Sunday. Not one. In 4 years you drove the 2 hours each way every single week to sit with an old woman who couldn't give you anything except her company and a porch swing that needed fixing. You read to me when my eyes started failing. You brought me homemade apple turnovers because you remembered they were my favorite. You never asked for anything. Not a dime. Not a favor. Not even a thank you. You just showed up. Week after week, year after year, you showed up. I was already crying. Silent tears that I was trying to hide. I didn't leave you everything because you earned it, Madison. I left it to you because you're the only one who never treated it like something to earn. You loved me just because I was me. And that's rarer than any amount of money. Helen's hand was on my back, firm and steady. Mr. Harrison kept reading. The total value of the estate, after taxes and legal fees, is approximately $1.8 million. The number landed like a stone in still water. Ripples everywhere. Susan gasped. Michael closed his eyes. My dad's face went through this transformation, like watching someone's internal structure collapse while maintaining an external appearance of holding together. Tricia stared straight ahead. Her hand had stopped trembling. It was balled into a fist so tight her knuckles were white. Mr. Harrison kept reading. Richard, I owe you an apology too. I gave you everything when you were young. Every toy you wanted. Every time you got in debt, I bailed you out. Every mistake you made, I cleaned up. I never made you feel the weight of any of it. I thought I was being a good mother. I was wrong. I never taught you how to build something yourself. I only taught you how to receive. That was my failure, and I've carried that guilt for a long time. My dad's jaw loosened just barely. For a second, I thought maybe he was going to cry. But understanding where entitlement comes from doesn't mean I should reward it, Mr. Harrison continued. I love you, Richard. And I hope one day you'll build something of your own. Not because you have to. Because you deserve to know what that feels like. Patricia leaned forward. So she admits it. She created this problem. She just said so. Helen turned to her. She admitted her part. What about yours? Patricia opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Closed it. Nothing came out. Pastor David bowed his head slightly, like he was giving her the mercy of not watching her drown in front of everyone. I understood then that my grandmother didn't hate my father. She was disappointed. And disappointment that runs that deep, that spans decades, is heavier than hate could ever be. Hate burns out. Disappointment just sits there year after year, waiting for someone to prove it wrong. Mr. Harrison turned to the last page. Madison, use this money to build the life you deserve. Buy a house. Travel. Go back to school if you want. Do whatever makes you feel like the ground is solid under your feet. But more than anything, don't ever let anyone make you feel guilty for being loved. Don't apologize for it. You are not taking something from your father. You are receiving something from your grandmother. There's a difference. And if your parents try to contest this, and they will, remember that I chose you not as punishment for them, but as a gift to you. Because you are the best of this family, and someone needed to say that while there was still time. Mr. Harrison folded the letter carefully and set it on the table. He removed his reading glasses and set them beside it. The silence that followed was the kind you can actually feel pressing against your skin. Pastor David stood slowly, walked to the head of the table, and shook Mr. Harrison's hand without saying a word. Then he sat back down. My dad stood up. His face had gone from red to gray. He looked at the letter, at the lawyer, at me. We're contesting this, he said flatly. His voice sounded like it had been emptied of everything. He took Patricia by the arm. She grabbed that new designer purse, the one she'd brought for this meeting so full of hope, and they walked out. The door closed behind them with a click that sounded like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Nobody followed them. The room felt different after they left. Lighter. Like everyone could finally breathe. Mr. Harrison waited a full minute before he spoke again. He was good at reading rooms, knowing when people needed quiet. "Madison, are you all right?" he asked. I almost laughed. "I don't know. Are you supposed to feel all right after something like this?" A small smile. "In my experience, no. What happens if they actually contest this?" I asked. Mr. Harrison reached into that portfolio again and pulled out another document. "Your grandmother included what's called a no contest clause. If either of them challenges the will in court and loses, they forfeit any claim to personal items, keepsakes, or anything else not specifically addressed in the estate distribution." Meaning if your father contests and loses, which, given the physician's certifications, the witnesses, and the video. "The video?" I said. Mr. Harrison nodded. 6 months before she passed, Rose asked me to arrange a video recording. She sits in her room at Sunset Gardens, looks directly into the camera, and explains her decision in full. She's articulate, lucid, and he allowed himself a small, sad smile, rather direct. 3 weeks later, my dad hired a lawyer from Denver. The kind with billboards on the highway advertising family disputes. "We fight for you." The claim was diminished capacity, that my grandmother lacked the mental ability to change her will and that I'd exerted undue influence on her. Undue influence. That's the legal term for she read her books and brought her favorite food. Mr. Harrison responded with the physician's certifications. 2 independent doctors, both board-certified, both confirming my grandmother's full cognitive function. Then he provided a copy of the video to the opposing lawyer. I never actually watched it myself. Mr. Harrison told me about it later. My grandmother sitting in her room at Sunset Gardens, hair done, wearing a nice blouse, looking straight into the camera. TV in the background was off. The bed was made. She'd prepared for this the way she prepared for everything, deliberately, carefully, with quiet dignity. She stated her name, the date, her reasons. She named my father. She named Patricia. She named me. And she explained in her own words exactly why she'd made the choice she made. Mr. Harrison said her voice didn't shake once. That she spoke for 12 minutes straight without notes, without pausing, without looking away from the camera. 83 years old, in a room with linoleum floors and a window that needed caulking, and she was more composed than anyone in that conference room had been. My dad's lawyer watched the video in Mr. Harrison's office. According to Mr. Harrison, the man sat quietly when it finished, then advised my dad to drop the case. Fighting something like that in front of a probate judge was a losing proposition, and the no contest clause made losing expensive. My dad called me that night. Just once. One last time. "You stole my mother from me," he said. I held the phone with both hands. I could hear Patricia in the background saying something sharp I couldn't make out. "No, Dad," I said. "You left her." "I just didn't." He hung up. Trisha blocked my number on everything within the hour. Phone, email, social media. All of it gone in 60 minutes. I stood in my kitchen and waited for the guilt to hit. The devastation. The crushing realization that I'd just lost my parents. But it didn't come. Or maybe it had come a long time ago and I just hadn't noticed when it left. I've learned a lot about myself in these months since the will reading. I've learned that silence can be a form of love when it's protective silence. Silence chosen because you're protecting your own peace, not because you're protecting someone else's comfort. I've learned that showing up is its own language, and some people will never learn to speak it. I've learned that inheritance isn't always about money. Sometimes it's about being seen, truly seen, by someone who matters. News travels fast in small towns. Nobody published anything. Pastor David didn't gossip, that wasn't his way. But when people asked him how my dad was handling things, he just said, "Rose made her wishes very clear." In small-town language, that sentence does a lot of work. The neighbors who'd watched my dad disappear over the years, who'd seen my car pulling into Sunset Gardens every Sunday like clockwork, who'd seen Patricia take that one Facebook photo and never visit again. They weren't surprised. I moved to Riverside about 3 months after the will reading. I got a job at the local library, transferred from Boulder. The Riverside branch is smaller, just 1 floor, 3 staff members, a children's section that smells like graham crackers and possibility. But it has these tall windows that let in amazing light. On Tuesdays, a group of retirees comes in for book club and they argue about plot twists like it's their job. Grandma would have loved that. I used part of the inheritance to start a scholarship. The Rose Patterson Community Scholarship. $5,000 a year to a Riverside High School graduate going into a skilled trade, carpentry, construction, electrical work, that kind of thing. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't a building with her name on it. It was practical and useful, which is exactly what my grandmother valued. Helen started coming over for dinner every Wednesday night. She'd bring a bottle of wine she claimed was for medicinal purposes, and we'd sit on the porch of my new home, Grandma's house on Elm Street, which I'd purchased from the estate using my inheritance, and we'd talk about Grandma, about her life, about the old days before everything went sideways. I started therapy in the fall. Not because of the money situation, but because I needed help untangling 30 years of managing my parents' emotions, of making myself smaller to keep the peace, of walking on eggshells in my own family. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, said something in our second session that absolutely stopped me in my tracks. You've been managing your parents' emotional labor since you were a child. That is not loyalty, Madison. That is labor. I sat with that for a long time. The house on Elm Street slowly became mine. I replanted Grandma's rose garden. I left her bookshelves exactly as they were. I hung a new photo next to her wedding picture, one of me and Grandma on the porch swing, both of us laughing at something I can't even remember. It doesn't matter what we were laughing about. What matters is that we were there together. I went back inside, washed my coffee mug, and fed my cat, a tabby named Rose Jr. who'd shown up on the porch in November and never left. She'd become my unexpected companion, the only family member who asked nothing of me except consistency and a full food bowl. Bell subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. New stories go up every week. Real stories about family, money, love, and what we leave behind. Backhand index pointing down. Comment below. What would you have done in Madison's place? Would you have reached out to your parents after all of this? Let's talk about it. 6 months after the will reading, a letter arrived. Handwritten on expensive cream-colored stationery with my mom's initials embossed at the top. I recognized it immediately. She used this kind of stationery for thank you notes and for passive-aggressive messages in equal measure. I opened it standing at my kitchen counter, still holding my coffee. Madison, we are your parents. We raised you. We fed you. We gave you every opportunity. Your grandmother was a bitter, manipulative old woman who spent her last years poisoning you against your own family. She used her money to divide us, and you let her. We deserve better than this. Your father is devastated. He lost his mother and his daughter in the same year. I hope you're satisfied. I read it twice. Set it on the counter. Drank my coffee. No apology. No acknowledgement of the blocked phone number. Of the nursing home she'd never visited. Of the attempted house sale. Of the Facebook photo and the phone in her hand. Of the 3 years of silence. Of the eulogy that got the author's name wrong. Just demands dressed up as grief. Entitlement wrapped in the language of motherhood. I sat at the desk in Grandma's study, my desk now, and I wrote back. Took me 4 drafts. The final version was 3 sentences. Mom, I received your letter. I hope you and Dad are well. I'm not ready to talk and I don't know when I will be. I wish you both the best. Madison. Not love. Not your daughter. Just my name. I sealed it, walked it to the mailbox, and put the flag up. I didn't write back out of anger. I wrote back because complete silence felt like I was becoming them, and I refused to become them. I'm sitting on the porch as I'm writing this. It's a Tuesday evening, the air smells like honeysuckle and grass. The oak tree in the front yard is massive. Grandma planted it in 1966, the year she and my grandfather moved into this house. 60 years of growing. It's taller than the house now. I didn't become a millionaire from this, even though the number sounds big. After estate taxes, legal fees, fixing the roof and the plumbing and updating the electrical, the inheritance became enough. Enough to stop worrying about rent. Enough to work a job I actually love without wondering if I can pay my car payment. Enough to breathe. But the real inheritance was never the money. It was permission. Permission to stop apologizing for being the person who shows up. Permission to stop feeling guilty every time I put myself first. Permission to look at my parents and say quietly, just to myself, sitting on this porch at dusk, I deserved better. And so did she. My grandmother taught me something that no check could buy. That love isn't a transaction. You don't owe someone your loyalty just because you share their DNA. Loyalty is earned. Presence is earned. And when someone shows you year after year that you're only worth their attention when you have something they want, you gotta believe them. If you're someone who always shows up, who drives the long distances, who makes the homemade treats, who sits in the hospital chair, who gets nothing but silence in return, I see you. My grandmother saw you too. That night, I was organizing the desk, moving things around to make space, and I found a small leather-bound notebook. Dark brown, worn soft at the edges. I opened it. Dates. Hundreds of them in my grandmother's handwriting. Every visit I'd ever made, cataloged like a treasure. Date, time I arrived, time I left, and a note. Sunday, March 3, 2019. Madison arrived 10:15 a.m., left 4:30 p.m., read 2 chapters of East of Eden. Sunday, June 14, 2020. Madison arrived 9:45 a.m., left 5 p.m., brought apple turnovers. Reminds me of childhood. Sunday, November 22, 2020. Madison arrived 10 a.m., left 3:15 p.m. First snow. She scraped my windshield before she left. 4 years. Over 200 entries. Every single visit recorded. And some had little additions in the margins. Good day. She looked tired but didn't complain. Or she fixed my reading lamp without me asking. She'd been keeping count the whole time. Keeping count. I turned to the last page. The last entry made 3 weeks before she died. In handwriting so shaky it was barely legible, she'd written, "I don't deserve her, but I'm grateful." And then below that, in even smaller writing, different pen, like it took everything she had to write it, one last line. "Madison, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Don't cry too long. Go live." That's all I ever wanted. I closed that notebook and held it against my chest, and for the first time since the funeral, I let myself fall apart completely. The house is quiet now. Porch swing creaks in the wind the same way it always did. But this house is mine. And for the first time in 29 years, I don't have to justify that to anyone. My name is Madison Ellis. And I inherited something worth far more than money. I inherited the right to choose my own life, exactly the way my grandmother chose hers. She wanted me to know I was worth choosing. Peach Balloon, if this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Backhand index pointing down, tell us in the comments. What city are you listening from and what time is it there? Have you ever been the person who showed up when no one else did? Did this story remind you of someone in your own life? Red heart like this story, bell subscribe for more, push pin share with your people. Every comment you leave helps more people find stories like this one. Thank you for being here. Madison.